first thing about IR is that it is a very broad field. And I know that concentrating on one field at such an early age or working towards it, it can be very broad given that you come from different streams. But so why should one study IR? Because it's basically how the world functions. It's a study of how political systems function, political thoughts function, and and it stimulates thought and analysis more than anything. Because when you know what is going on in the world and you are a part of it, it you have to know that it directly affects the societies, and being a part of the thought process that stimulates how the society functions is something that is going to catch on a lot in the world of politics, in the world of economics, and all other fields as well. And it's involved in every other field. There is politics and there is IR, there is diplomacy in every field, but more in the social structures than anything else. Now, we also get involved with the roles capable of making change, and you are actually in the field thinking about how to make change and the very real stuff that happens in the world. It is definitely a broad field, as I said, but you can flourish at whatever you like. That is a good part of IR, because there is so many streams within IR. There is economics, international relations also has security, trade, and that we'll get to later. But there is a lot of fields that IR encompasses, and it somehow gets you networking and building connections through time. It makes your circle broader and broader, because you're there in the field questioning the system, questioning the theories, questioning why the world functions the way it does, and why nations interact the way they do. So you are at the bottom of all of it. And that is why I think one should study IR. On top of that, I also think that it's a very aesthetic field. And because humanities or social sciences in itself are different from all other STEM fields, that is because it stimulates thought in a very different manner. It stimulates resistance, and it stimulates an understanding of why we are it's very philosophical, but at the same time it's very practical. So I found it very aesthetic personally. um, Now, what does international relations entail? That's, I think, the most basic question of why one should actually go for IR. Now, international relations basically, especially in the bachelor's, would encompass theory, a lot of theory. That is because, without theory, there won't be any practice. Without an understanding of how political philosophies have come into action, how schools of thoughts have come into action, it is difficult to understand how they were actually implemented. So, in your bachelor's degree, you would study basic theories like realism, liberalism, or feminism, the green theory, all the theories that we talk about or see on Instagram, see on YouTube. But we do not actually know what they mean, or do not actually, we are really confused about how they are actually applied to the political systems or the society, especially in the 21st century. But you get to learn these theories and how they came into being, what is the right and left agenda. Because today it's very difficult to catch on with the politics. It's very difficult to choose a side, and we ourselves, it gets difficult to understand what we really want or what we would want to support. So learning that theory and why these things came into being, and what thought provoked the theory, is very important. So you will definitely learn about the theory and history. Now, we have a lot of international organizations like United Nations, European Union, NATO, the G20 and G7 summits that keep happening, and a lot of other international organizations that work for human rights, that work for the LGBTQ communities, for and everything else. So you get to understand the history of why these organizations came into being, why feminism or feminist organizations came into being in the first place. and why are they still relevant today, or you even get to question whether they are still relevant today. So it's, it's, there is a kind of, space to grow within the field, because it's your thought and it shapes your thought. So history is a very important part of international relations. That said, you get to study in your bachelor's, I hopefully think so, that you might get to study a lot about a few authors, like Gayatri Spivak from India, or Foucault and Derrida. These are the most popular names in international relations, because they talk about the study of discourse and the study of knowledge, as in, you know, you think about why something is the way, why something acts the way it does, and why something came into being the way it did. So all of, and this is a part of political philosophy, but again, it's theory. So the first part is theory, and then comes practice. And as I said, theory is very, very important. So you would be learning about philosophers like Foucault and Derrida and a lot more other philosophers and political theories. And again, you study about nation states and why they function. Now, that's what the difference between political science and IR is, that political science, somewhere we'll get back to it again in the next slide, but political science somewhat tries to study the structure within the governmentality or within the political system. But IR, within IR, you study the interaction between nation states. You see why they interact the way they do, and what it looks like on the global scale, on the international scale. Political sciences and international, what is the difference? Yes. So again, political science is a general study of how governments and policies function, as I said, and it's, a collection of analysis and data that that gets examined within the system of governments, of policies, how policies are framed, what policies need to be framed. It is also a very broad field. It encompasses economics, trade policies, and how politics affects those things. But it is again a study that works within governmentality and governance. While international relations is again an interaction based study, it studies how nation states, or the bigger pictures of the countries at large interact the way they do with each other, and what they would want from each other. That is what diplomacy is, right? We see all these diplomats and ambassadors. Their role, the primary role that they do, is to find a middle ground as to how their nation can interact with the other nation, and uh, with a win-win purpose, right? So it does not actually entail a singular governmental functioning, but the larger picture of how various political forces and nations interact and strategize. Now, it questions also, questioning and resistance, I think, is a very important part of international relations, because, you know, political science, it gives you an answer. Okay, this is the structure, this is what has come into being since, since ages, and it's presented to you, and you study what is presented to you. But international relations, because of the political theories involved, philosophical theories that are involved, it stimulates questioning and resistance in you as to why the society works the way it does. Yeah, the study of practice in IR. Now that we're done with the theory, we go to the practice and how it's implemented, how the theory or whatever you study is implemented within the course. Now, all of this you shall learn in your bachelor's, and you know the modules as well. There's a lot of modules concerning every topic involved. Working of organizations and their objectives, as I said, of United Nations or other international organizations, human rights organizations within Geneva, within New York and London, and also the East Asian organizations. Everything you study, the working of these organizations, their objectives, why, how they function, everything. And security and critical military studies. Now, this was something that interested me particularly, and I chose a module that involved both of these, security and critical military studies. Now, these are border and defense diplomacy studies. This module is more about, militarization and how and why wars have occurred in the past and what is the purpose of war. How does a nation train its military to interact with other nations? And I personally think it's very interesting. Trade, we all know, we learn about in export, import, and what the policies and the framing of the trade and how nations actually look at trade. Personally, like the European Union and the Brexit was a situation of, the base of it was trade. Because of the trade relations between these nations, uh, Brexit happened. So trade influences a lot of other political relations, and this module, you will have this module as well in most of the bachelor's programs: international political economy and flow of capital, and health policies, immediate task force operations post COVID 19. Health policies and health, these come within political science as well, but within international relations, you learn more about how health policies are implemented and whether they are any good for the society. How international relations looks at, the interactions between how some nation would help the other nation in terms of crisis, and in times of crisis, and in times of, any kind of a misery that takes, that befalls the entire world together. And what is the actual intention behind helping these nations? Because, you know we've read in the news about why, how India has been helping Russia, or Russia has been helping other nations, and UK obviously has been helping a lot of Western nations after post COVID-19. And there is always a motivation that stimulates this help, and we learn more about why, a nation helps other nations, and what is the actual motivation, whether it's humane or whether it's something to do with, politics again. Human rights is a very specific and a very in very broad field, because it has, or it encompasses of all the SDGs, and and their application. And especially in the United Nations, human rights has a very important role, because a lot of jobs are based on human rights. And in today's world, we see how human rights are actually, under threat. So it is also a very broad field. You can major in various human rights, or various, details and specializations within the module as well. Environment and climate change, and SDGs and their application. Yes. Skills and motivations. We're talking about, what skills you do need and what skills would be developed as well. Empathy, the ability to associate yourself by thought and practice to the functioning of the political world, and how gravely it affects the society as a whole. Now, if you're an empath, you relate with, people getting affected by how political systems work. This is a field for you, because you want to make change, but if you're not aware of how it's affecting people, and you don't feel bad about the misery that people are facing, then it might just be difficult for you to associate with the studies, because this is international relations encompasses a study of change and motivation and questioning more than anything else. Critical thinking, indulging in thought provoking conversations and research that allows you to critically analyze and, more importantly, question the system. The bachelor's program and even the master's program has a separate module for critical thinking, and there's also a theory for critical thinking called the critical theory, and there is a lot of other theories that fall within this theory. That is because this is one of the most important skills and parts required to analyze every other theory, every other practice. So you will also develop a sense of how you look at things and how you perceive things, and that changes with time, that develops with time, and that develops with a lot of reading and um, that leads to resistance again, because if you can actually have the ability to look at something in a very deeper sense, then it already, if you have the ability to question norms and their formation and why they were implemented, for whose benefit they were implemented, that is when you turn to resistance and you talk about resisting something. So, again, that is our next point, to decipher and bring into action ways of resisting the preconceived norms that function as per previously created discourses and ideologies. Now, developmental approach, that is, in the 21st century, we have everything that somewhat leads to development in the very, a very preconceived sense. That is because someone has already defined what development should feel like or should be. Now, international relations does not go with the normal norms of development, of capitalism, or buildings and economy flow. It instead is a question to development, and why development is the way it is, what should actually be considered development, right? And you, when with time, once you grow into the field, you also have your own perspective of what development should feel like, what development should, you know actually be theorized as. And then you look for ways to enhance, emancipate, and equip the approach towards an inclusive development.